Hello there, my name is Sinclair Davidson, and I'm talking to you about the economics of shared security. This is a joint project with my colleagues Darcy Allen and Chris Berg. Now, we all know that in the crypto sense, that security is astonishingly valuable, but we also know that it is very costly to produce. So as economists, we would be thinking about the ideas of should we be making our own security or should we be buying our own security? And in our paper, what we have looked at is the notion of buying our own security or sharing security as opposed to making it ourselves. Now, shared security basically means that we've got multiple blockchain networks sharing the same security mechanism or sharing the same set of validators or miners. Now, there are advantages to this. Obviously, smaller chains can leverage off the security of larger established chains. We can enhance interoperability, and of course, this becomes a diversified source for income for validators. The disadvantages, however, is that this could be a source of centralization amongst blockchains. It could also become a single source of failure amongst blockchains. And then, of course, we have problems around conflicts of interest. We have people working together who may have very disparate interests. And so we need to manage how all of those interests would work together. Now, if we start off by thinking as shared security as a business, which I know for some people is somewhat controversial, but nonetheless, let's just entertain the idea that we can think of shared security as being a business. We would have a producer chain and we would have a consumer chain, and what would be happening is that the miners or validators on the producer chain would be validating the transactions which occur on the consumer chain. And the very first thing that we need to think about this is, well, how would we pay for all of this? Would it be a percentage of revenue? Would it be a percentage of MEV? Would it be a percentage of inflation? Would there be some sort of debt mechanism whereby the consumer chain pays off the producer chain over a period of time? And then, of course, who bears the risks of that sort of transaction in the short term, and so on and so forth. So there is actually quite a lot to think about in this whole story. But nonetheless, the very simple idea of it is that we have an interrelationship between a producer chain and a consumer chain, where one chain provides a service to the other chain. But this, of course, is a long-term contract. We have an ongoing relationship between two parties. And then the question is, how do we manage these two parties? And that is where the need for governance arises in all of this. And in particular, we want to avoid problems which could actually arise from these long-term relationships. And the first problem that we want to avoid is vertical integration. We actually want to avoid the situation where one chain effectively takes over the other chain. So effectively, we have almost like a hostile takeover in a corporate sense, or we have a higher degree of centralization. What we actually would ideally have is a situation whereby we still have two sovereign chains where one chain is simply trading with the other chain for a necessary service. The other thing that we wish to avoid is exit, where we suddenly have one chain suddenly say to the other chain, our relationship is over and we are terminating right now. That, of course, causes all sorts of problems for the users of each of the chains and for the planning and business models that people may actually have built on chains. So our project uses what is called contract theory to identify governance hazards and propose recommendations. Now, this contract theory is actually new institutional economics. So let me explain very quickly what that contract theory actually is. So what is a contract? Well, we're actually talking about contracts in an economic sense and not in a legal sense. So we should really think of these as agreements or arrangements or a set of mutually reinforcing promises that we make to each other that are identifiable, that are enforced by a disinterested third party. In this instance, hopefully smart smart contracts. Now, contract theory or new institutional economic theory is based upon the works of several well-known economists. We've got up there 4 Nobel Prize winning economists, so Ronald Coase, Oliver Hart, Oliver Williamson, Elinor Ostrom, these sorts of people who have thought long and hard about the problems of coming to mutually acceptable arrangements with people over long periods of time, entering into long-term contracts, how we share resources, how we share the gains from trade from sharing resources. All of these things, there is a well-known, well-understood, well-accepted body of knowledge that economists have thought about for a long period of time, and what we are doing is applying that body of knowledge to this new problem. So it's actually just stock standard economic theory being applied to a new interesting problem which we have observed in the world. So what are the things that can go wrong when you are designing a contract? Well, the first thing that can go wrong is that there is opportunism. People lie, steal, cheat, behave in deceitful ways, work in their own advantage. So you enter into a relationship and you immediately begin subverting that relationship for your own benefit as opposed to mutual benefit. So opportunism, that could happen. Most people are very familiar with the idea. Then we have maladaptation. So what happens when the world around us changes? We've entered into agreement, everybody's very happy, everybody's working together very well, and then the world changes and the contract that we have is no longer appropriate or no longer mutually beneficial. At this point, we might start thinking, well, we need to renegotiate, but one party may want to renegotiate and another party may not. Or we might have lock-in or hold-up problems where one party's made an investment in the relationship and the other party's made less of an investment, and the power relationships between the parties suddenly change. Now, other things that can go wrong, well, you're running your chain, you want to be sovereign, you want to make your own business decisions, you want to change prices, or you want to change revenue shares, or one chain suddenly becomes wildly successful and no longer needs to buy security, so on and so forth. So, of course, all sorts of things can go wrong in the world or change in the world, undermining the relationship or transaction. So we need to have a governance mechanism. And the first thing we need to think about is, how is this governance mechanism working? So we could say, well, we could be selling security as a service. That would be a standard sort of business kind of relationship. We could think of security as a commons, which Darcy, Chris, and I are not quite convinced would work very well. We could think of it as a club. Yes, that could work. We could think of it as a consortium. That too could work. But no matter how we think of it as a service or a club or a consortium, the question is, how do we coordinate ourselves? So when we are coordinating, how do we avoid one party capturing the other party, one power party having an unusual power relationship or the ability to impose their preferences on the other party without permission? How do we scale? What happens if our subsidiary chain or our consumer chain suddenly becomes astonishingly larger or more profitable or more valuable than the security chain? Does that undermine security? How do we deal with that happy situation, of course? How do we avoid centralization? How do we avoid single sources of failure? So these are things that we've been thinking about and trying to fix in our particular story. So what we've done is we've actually looked at a number of existing shared security relationships and kind of worked out what's going on, how people have organized them. And what we've found so far is that current agreements tend to be open-ended, and people haven't actually thought about governance too much, which is, of course, problematic. So we need to actually have mechanisms whereby people can adapt and renegotiate or exit in an orderly manner that you don't actually disadvantage your trading partner. And we're also basically saying that all agreements should be time limited. So there should be triggers and processes for renegotiation. So we should actually not just have these open-ended contracts that we currently see at the moment. We should actually have some structure around these around the contract themselves. And then we should need to have some structure around the process that's actually occurring. And that is where we think there need to be more DAOs. There actually need to be security DAOs. So for each and every single security relationship, there should be a DAO that manages that relationship with representatives from the consumer chain and the producer chain, so that they can bring to bear local knowledge, they can bring to bear negotiation techniques. They really need to know what is going on. So there needs to be structure, there needs to be process, and we need to be applying knowledge that we already know from the non-digital world in managing the digital world. So that's our paper in a nutshell. If you would like to know more, we have written this up in the context of Cosmos, and we have a paper up at the Social Science Research Network. So if you really want to know more, please go and download the paper or reach out and contact us. We are happy to talk to anybody and everybody around shared security, or actually any other aspect of crypto economics. So thank you very much for your time.